Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Frank Reyes, the Managing Director for Software and Infrastructure Capabilities at Maximus. Frank, good to have you back with us today. Let's talk about cloud native services and solutions. People are adopting that more and more, getting away from things they operate in their own data center. And one of the things that is a cloud thing, born cloud, is generative AI. You hear about agencies across the board experimenting with it, using that cloud hosted. This sounds like it's going to have a big impact on cloud budgets and IT budgets. One of those kind of hidden punches you may not see coming. Tell us more.
Yeah, so when you're, first thing is I hope more organizations experiment with generative AI. Cost is definitely a concern, but being able to experiment, I think, is key there. But yes, the sticker shock that comes with AI workloads is something to be mindful of, for sure. And I like to step back a little bit and as organizations writ large just running normal workloads, standard running healthcare.gov or any other type of site there. Running those organizations are what I would refer to as the V2 era. They're version 2 of the cloud. They were early adopters of moving to the cloud. They've been in the cloud. Now they're starting to look at how do I optimize my performance, and realizing that their cloud spend is becoming disproportionately larger than they had anticipated for it. And that's not by anyone's fault. The low friction of being able to spin up infrastructure or click on a capability in the cloud, that frictionless service is actually what has allowed so much innovation to come through. But it comes with a trade-off of, you've probably heard of cloud sprawl, of having resources out in the cloud that have been abandoned by people forgetting about it or them running, and it coming up with a very large bill at the end of the day.
It's almost like people replaced cable with streaming one-by-one services, and next thing you know, you've got your cable bill all over, but it's just fragmented.
To some degree, what we're really seeing is, I like to say is, when you're operating in the cloud, you have to have a new operating model from how you used to do IT. You can't just, you've probably heard of the term lift and shift of workloads. There is a place for that, for sure. But lift and shift the people and processes, that is, and I would say the processes specifically, that usually doesn't work. You have to have new processes of operating. You have to have guardrails of putting it there. I like to share the story is, in the early days of traditional IT, you would have to call somebody up and say, I need a server, and they would see, okay, hey, we have this server space, I can give you an IP address that you can connect to, I can give you the credentials, and you call that individual, we'll have to put this through a change control board so we can give you this, and we'll get you that server access in about a month. That was like the traditional way. That friction at least created some aspect of traceability of what was being spun up, who asked for it, how long it's been up there, and so on and so forth. The self-serve model took away those guardrails, but many organizations didn't consider what new guardrails I had to have in there. The first one wasn't an intentional guardrail, it was almost by happenstance, but now you kind of have to have that. And so we're definitely seeing cloud program management offices, PMOs, starting to now create some of these initial guardrails for their developers.
And for generative AI, how does it drive cost? Is it data flows or?
As you know, all of the cloud service providers are investing very heavily into having available AI services for their users. The underlying hardware for them are very expensive. We've all heard the earnings calls from the major hardware vendors who provide much of this AI technology in the back end. And so those being expensive translates to the services being more costly than just running a normal compute workload. And so yes, so Gen AI even more so, right? Because that is very, very compute intensive. So as organizations look at using more artificial intelligence in their applications, they can expect some correlative increase in cost for that, for sure.
And if you use a generative program, say, to create images or to create documents, and you get those down, all of a sudden you're in the mode of lots of data coming back to you from the cloud, and that's a cost driver.
Yeah, I mean, there are data called ingress and egress charges, right, for that. But I think
that's what got people early on, was they didn't realize those egress charges. It was free this way, but costly this way.
Yes, and actually many of the CSPs have kind of reduced that, because now it's kind of like almost like text messaging back in the day. It used to cost, like 10 cents, or, you'd have to buy a text bundle.
How many minutes?
How many minutes of texting you or how many numbers of texts you could have a month. I'm old enough to know that I had to be on one of those plans. But
you're not old enough to have dialed.
Oh, yeah, that's right. But so in early days of clouds, yes, data egress and ingress charges were a large portion. Now that's kind of been normalized and commoditized in the background. It's really the AI services, them actually doing the processing, because they're taking up resource time for them.
And you're using a licensed product somewhere, so that cost is built in there too.
And that's in standard, just like you would in standard compute for that as well.
Right. Well, when it comes to spend management then, I mean, how do you optimize that? What are the pitfalls? That sounds like a discipline that an IT department has to have dedicated.
Yes, there's a term out there. It's called FinOps, financial operations. In IT, we like to add ops to the end of everything, and so that's just one of them. Soon the word soup will be DevSec, Fin, AI ops. It'll just continue all the way around the circle. But what this really focuses on, right? There's a FinOps organization, a nonprofit that was stood up because people were starting to realize that cost is not, you don't just have to worry about reporting costs or thinking about reporting costs. You want to have guardrails, but you don't want to have cages for your developers, right? There's a balance in there. And so how do I make design choices from the architecture point of view to the actual development point of view to the operations point of view of using the cost of my IT spend as part of a design constraint within there. And so you can make those trade-offs. And bringing that information as close to the people who are making the decisions, developers, or DevOps engineers, to actually see what that is. Because for most of their time, the cost of infrastructure was blind to them. They did not. They just asked for a server back in the day. And even in cloud today, they just spin up a server. Because that financial management of that cloud spend is usually siloed in another part of an organization, right? Either in the IT office, but not in the development office parts of organizations. And so it's really bringing that insight back to the application developers, the application owners, so that they're aware of that. And that whole continuity of how do I make those trade-offs, how do I inform the people who are making those decisions to make those appropriate trade-offs so that me as an organization can stay within certain budget constraints. Because for the federal government, most of their IT spend was all CapEx. They asked for a certain amount of money, and that money either went for tech refreshes of buying new software, hardware licenses, and that was a known fixed cost every year, and they just budgeted and programmed for that. With the variability in cloud, that's really where they're starting, and that's more of a CapEx, a capital expenditure, an OpEx model. That's where you're starting to see them being a lot more concerned. And what winds up happening is people under-innovate. They hold back because they don't know what their bill is going to be. We don't want that. That's what we call an anti-pattern. We want them to really be making the best feature choices within budget that they can and be most informative. And that's what FinOps really gets you.
Right, so that developers then understand that just getting down to features that you may want to offer under a digital service, that's going to have a cloud cost impact. And so they can maybe make trade-offs, say, well, if we add this feature, it's going to cost this much. I mean, that's the kind of calculus you make.
Yeah, and then even for the developer, well, if I'm going to build that feature, I can use this database or this database. it gives me the same performance. Oh, well, and this is 10% less? Well, if they're the same performance, I'm going to choose that. But if they don't have that, they're just going to choose either one, what they're familiar with, or with what, is what everybody else in the organization is doing. But now that they might have that insight, they might make that trade-off for you. And vice versa. They might actually have a very good argument that for that feature, we're actually going to need something more robust than what we currently are operating with, whether it's compute infrastructure or a database. And then you can see that, yes, we can make those decisions. It's all about informing and giving people the right information that they need to make informed decisions.
Because there is a feature functionality and there's a cost, but there's also a third element, and that's the benefit. Mm-hmm. And so you would have to trade off, does this benefit my program? Or maybe does this benefit my ability to audit and create anti-fraud mechanisms, for example? I'm just thinking of what's been going on in the government. So maybe that feature may cost you this much more on the cloud and the IT budget, but maybe it'll save you $1 billion over here because you've prevented fraud. I'm just making this up, but that's the kind of thing that I think you tell me that agencies ought to be thinking about then.
Yes, and part of that, we haven't talked about this, value-oriented development. How do I actually develop so that I have a value, demonstrative value, that's beyond the feature, right? The feature is the mechanism by which you are delivering value. But how do you actually design using value orientation? And then it actually makes that, and you start from that point when you start to do your architectural design, that's the value creation we want to have. We want to reduce the number of touch points a citizen has to, clicks that they have to do on a website, or the number of forms that they have to submit, or the amount of times they have to contact us, right? That is a value to a user. Let's translate that into a feature, and as we know that the customer experience is a very strong policy push right now within the federal government. And so, bringing that all together, right, it comes back to that customer experience, value-oriented designing, lets you make those decisions. And now you have the financial, you have the FinOps to substantiate that as well. Beforehand, we were just reporting costs. Now we have a way to actually do those trade-offs and make those decisions.
So you think of the effect. It's almost like taking the value analysis approach in mechanical engineering to make products back into something that they should have been thinking about 50 years ago in software, but now cloud brings out the need for that in some way.
Yeah, and in government, they do have the unique case of they're not typically looking at reducing the cost per transaction. Right, or cost per click, right? That's typically a commercial metric. So that, as you're saying, that is their equivalency, is the value within the citizen experience or the customer experience for that is that design principle.
So the lesson there is that the design and trade-offs is not simply a function of the developers and FinOps and IT operations, but you have to have your program people as part of that team.
And that's what FinOps brings. It helps to bring that all together, that discipline, and communicating that to the entire team. It's an area where it's not really different from how we have started to look at security and how we're making everybody's job security, right? This is kind of where you're going to move to that, is using that same mental framework that we've developed for embedding security to every part of our IT organization. Now financial operations is now going to be an area also where you're going to see an embeddings of that knowledge into it.
Now that's an easy thing to visualize and talk about, but cloud actual cost, the invoices are extremely complex. So I'm beginning to sniff the need for artificial intelligence to come in and maybe abstract the calculations you have to do so that the FinOps discussions can have real meaning and predictability.
Yeah, so many of the available FinOps platforms that are available to use to help support your FinOps practice.
This has been productized.
Yeah, it's been productized because you're going to need to have data. That data is going to have to be contextualized, and then that's going to have to be normalized against, because as you mentioned, sometimes organizations are at different parts of their IT journey. So they might have on-premises IT infrastructure, they might be in a public cloud or their own private cloud. So you need these FinOps platforms to kind of help bring that all together for you. And so that's where many of those vendors who are building those products are embedding artificial intelligence in there. I like to first advise our customers start with automation. There's a lot of things you can do with automation. And many of the CSPs have this natively into their infrastructure, that if there's a resource that's just running the meter per se, it will detect it. It will let you know, and you can get to a point where if after 10 days, it can go and decommission that, right? And that's step one. It's a low cost, easy way. Now, when you want to start to get more sophisticated maturity in your FinOps practice, that's where I definitely see those FinOps platforms with the artificial intelligence being meaningful for you.
And just thinking about this, I would imagine that even your user interface and your usability analysis could figure into how you design an application, because maybe something is needed to help people, but maybe something you think they needed is not needed.
Oh yeah, I mean that the feedback mechanism on what actual features are being utilized, that in itself is its own aspect of user research design for that. But again, you can use the information that comes in there to help inform your FinOps practice.
Because you don't want vestigial operations or applications sitting there, as you say, running the meter, and someone thought they needed them, and then you look back 6 months and nobody touched it, but you've got the bill for it.
Yeah, you have a button that nobody ever clicks on your site, and you're like, well, why are we maintaining the functionality of that? We should probably get rid of it. And that flows right, exactly what you're saying, that flows right back into your FinOps. Okay, I'm not going to spend any development time. Actually, I'm going to deprecate that button because it's going to provide a cleaner UI for my users, and it's actually going to reduce our costs. So yes, 100%.
Yeah, because at the scale of federal-sized operations or some of the huge industries, each little thing might be almost immeasurably small individually, but it adds up to millions and billions at the scale.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that the federal government does is operations at scale, right? There's whether you think of the FAA flying, or you think Veterans Affairs, or you think CMS, right? It's large operations at scale.
So you could say, instead of saying click here, I accept the terms and understand, and then complete, just hit by complete, I hereby accept what's above, you save a click.
Right. That or
10 billion clicks a year.
Or where we're seeing some organizations is, please provide your name, date of birth once, and we'll populate that through all, instead of having to go to the next page in this other form, and and you also need this other service within my own agency that you have to do this again. That's another website you have to create. That's another security attack service you have to maintain, right? It all, as I mentioned, the DevSec security, Fin, AI, right? It's all gonna, all plays in. It's all intertwined.
There's an anagram in there somewhere.
Yeah,
we'll
for
have to figure it out sometime else. And finally, any success stories you've seen in agencies that have actually got this kind of thinking built into the way they operate?
Well, we're still early days in full-on FinOps practices in the federal government. We've seen where the Army's Enterprise Cloud Management Agency, ECMA, stood up Camo, which is one of their cloud management offices. And they've seen savings in first, and they started off first tracking the spend and then providing insights on what to do about that spend. And we're starting to see organizations that are mature in their first go in the cloud, starting to now move beyond just reporting, now doing something about that, now bringing the practice back into that. And that's something, I'm happy that where I work at is I get to help support that maturity model of organizations looking just beyond reporting to actually doing something about that.
In 1946, memory was expensive, storage was expensive, so they came up with the 2-digit date code. That same kind of thinking you really need here in 2024, 25.
Oh yeah, and I think let's bring it full circle, right? You started off with talking about AI, right? We're going to start to see where AI starts to get more and more efficient, right? The days of $4,200 GPUs aren't going to be very long. We're going to get to that very small, and then yes, we're going to get back to a lot more efficiency in that space.
All right, FinOps, the code word for the day. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Tom.
I want to thank today's guest. Frank Reyes is the Managing Director for Software and Infrastructure Capabilities at Maximus. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Cloud Exchange.